Hello, and welcome to this T-Level Tactics video on data entry for Root Core 3 data of the T-Level Digital Support Services course. And in this video, we're going to identify methods to ensure data accuracy. We'll explain the concepts of data validation and data verification. And we'll also analyse the requirements and legislation for data privacy. Now, before we get started, T-Level Tactics videos are not endorsed or sponsored by any education institution or qualification awarding body. And T-Level Tactics videos should not be used as a replacement to any classroom learning you might be receiving, as the discussion and practical activities with your peers and lecturer will help to expand your thinking and comprehension of the topic. Instead, these materials are best used as preparation material or as revision to reinforce your learning. And these videos also cover the same content and required knowledge for Root Core 3 of the T-Level Digital Business Services course. However, they will be more contextualised towards IT support roles. Let's get started. While there's lots of data that is collected automatically by software, there's still a lot of data that's entered manually by people. Whether it's online to sign up or register for something, completing a questionnaire, applying for a job, entering statistics and results, and much more. The problem with humans is that we're prone to make mistakes. Unfortunately, they happen. But in databases, mistakes with data can cause big issues. We can have inaccurate data, irretrievable data, could even be in breach of data laws. And as a consequence, could cause some serious harm. Imagine you were expecting an important letter, but forgot to put your house number in when you entered your data. Or if you applied for a passport and forgot to add your date of birth to the application. Or what about if you remembered to enter your date of birth, but accidentally put it in the first name field instead? Well, yeah, I think you can see how things can go quite wrong. So when designing forms for people to enter data, we can restrict the types of data that can be entered. For instance, we could prevent numbers from being entered into a name field, where we would expect there to be characters instead. Now, we've looked at data types used in databases already in an earlier video, but we can ensure more accurate data upon entry by using some more specific data types. And these are closer in nature to data types used in programming languages. If we're expecting a numeric value, we can specify what kind of numbers the form should accept. We could have an integer, which is a whole value number with no decimal points, such as 1, 10, -5, 256, numbers like that. And an integer uses 16 bits to store data, which means they can only store values between -32,768 and 32,767. So what about if we want to store a number larger than that? Well, that's where we could use a float, for instance, which is a decimal number up to 9 digits, depending on whether it's positive or negative, or we could use a double, which uses twice the amount of data as an integer to store a decimal number up to 16 digits in length. In terms of text, if it's expected, we can narrow down specifically what kind of text we want. If it's a character, which is an individual letter, digit, or symbol, like the letter A, B, or C, or the rest of the alphabet, for example, or if we want a string. And a string is a fancy way of saying a sequence of characters stored together, i.e. a sentence, like the bullet points on this slide. We could even have Boolean. And Boolean's a nice name for something that could be one thing or another, true or false, on or off. And it should be used where we want to offer a limited selection of options to the user, where we do want them to have a checkbox, a true-false answer, or a yes-no answer, for instance, or a checkbox to offer multiple selections from predetermined items. Or we could even use something called a radio button, which is to make the user pick one selection from a variety of options. We can combine different data types into forms, ensuring the entry of accurate data and preventing data errors. Let's take a look at an example of where we might use this. Here's a very basic form with a variety of different boxes and also some different options at the bottom here. At the top, for first initial, we're expecting a character, whereas for surname, we're expecting a string. For age, we want a whole number, so we'll have an integer, and usually age is going to be quite a small number in comparison to the number of numbers available. Whereas for a mobile number, they can be quite long. They have a lot of digits, 11 usually. We'll want to store them using a double. And finally, with our question at the bottom, do you hold a passport? We want the user to select one of the two options, yes or no. We can't get them to select both because that doesn't really tell us anything. So here we've used a radio button, which means they can select one of these options or the other, but not both. So if you're a member of the Patreon, you can head over to patreon.com/tleveltactics and download the task sheet. And you can have a go at the first task. It'll take you about 30 minutes. So pause the video here, have a go, and then come back when you're ready to move on to part 2. Let's take a look at data validation and data verification. Enforcing specific data types on entry is a basic form of data validation. Data validation is ensuring data meets a set of criteria you've put out. But data verification is slightly different. Data verification is ensuring the data is accurate and as intended. And we can use both data validation and data verification to prevent erroneous data from being entered into our database. Data verification can be performed both before and after data has been entered. But it's before the data actually reaches the database. Data verification could be manual verification, automated verification, input verification, or confirmation prompts. Manual verification is often used with paper documentation or as a final check for important decisions, where the data is checked by a person for errors. The data could be compared against existing data for accuracy, such as verifying addresses against a postal database, for example. Automated verification is often performed by software, and it will check entries against predefined criteria. And it can check against existing data to prevent duplication as well. For instance, if you're signing up for a website, it will check if you're already a member and stop you from progressing any further if it finds that you are. Input verification could be asking a user to enter information twice, such as entering an email address or password on 2 separate fields to ensure the user has entered it correctly. And confirmation prompts could be something like asking a user to read through the data entered and confirm it. And this could be a final summary page for an application form, for example. Data verification should increase the accuracy of data submitted, and multiple verification methods can be used together, increasing the reliability and trustworthiness of that data. And it also enhances data quality by ensuring only accurate and complete data is stored. Data validation ensures data meets sets of criteria, and the data is rejected if these are not met. It could be used to ensure data is in the expected format, or that it falls within an accepted range or category. And data validation could be presence validation, format validation, range validation, type validation, or length validation. Let's take a look at those. Presence validation is ensuring all fields contain data that is required. Format validation is where data is expected to be presented in a specific way, such as a date, for example. So it could be in a date, month, year format or a month, day, year format, depending on where in the world the website or form is based. Or it could be an email address where an @ symbol and a dot is expected within the text. Range validation is where a value is expected to be within a certain range. For example, an age field may only accept numbers between 1 and 120, or a rating field may only accept numbers between 0 and 10. Length validation is where data must be a certain length to be accepted. It could be for usernames, for example, where you may want more than 5 characters but less than 15. Or for mobile numbers, where 11 digits are expected. And type validation is, well, we've looked at this previously, where data entered is required to be of a certain data type, such as integer, string, or Boolean. There's also one additional method of validation and verification, and it's used mainly in data transmissions over a network, and they're known as checksums. And checksums are used to verify that data received is the same as that sent. It is sometimes known as a hash. Essentially, an algorithm creates a number or checksum based on the content of the data, and when the data is received, the same algorithm will check the data again. The resulting number should be the same both times. And if the number is different, then the data may have been changed or corrupted during transmission. Data validation can be enforced in Microsoft Access by entering the design view of a table. When you have a table open, head to the top left of the screen and click on View, and then Design View. At the bottom of the screen, you'll see this, where you can see validation rule and validation text in the center. More information on data validation in Microsoft Access can be found on the Microsoft Support website. You can head to Access, Tables, Creating Tables, and the article that says Restrict Data Input by using validation rules. Now for Patreon members, you can head back to the task sheet and have a go at task 2. This one will only take about 20 minutes. So pause the video here, have a go at task 2, and then come back when you're ready to move on to part 3. Let's have a look at some laws and legislation surrounding data privacy. In the United Kingdom, data privacy, usage and storage are governed by several key pieces of legislation. There's GDPR, or the UK General Data Protection Regulation, the Data Protection Act of 2018, the Privacy and Electronic Communications Regulations, the Freedom of Information Act 2000, and the Computer Misuse Act of 1990. All of these laws and legislations will have been updated at various points in time. You can find all the updates online. I'll give you that web address a bit later. GDPR, or the UK General Data Protection Regulation, came into effect January 1st, 2021, and it's based on the European Union GDPR legislation, but adapted for the UK when the UK left the European Union. It outlines key data protection principles. Lawfulness, fair, and transparency is the first, where data must be processed lawfully, fairly, and in a transparent manner to the user or the subject. There's purpose limitation, where data should be collected for specified legitimate purposes and not further processed in a way incompatible with those purposes. Data minimization, where only data that's necessary for the intended purpose should be collected. Accuracy, where the data must be accurate and kept up to date. There's a storage limitation, where the data can't be kept any longer than necessary for the purposes for which it was processed. And integrity and confidentiality, where the data must be processed securely to protect against unauthorized access, loss, or damage. GDPR also outlines the rights that individuals have regarding their personal data and its use by organizations, including the right to access their data, the right to rectification to correct any inaccurate data that may exist, the right to erasure, otherwise known as the right to be forgotten, the rights to restrict the processing of their data, the rights to data portability, and the right to object to any data processing as well. Organizations must demonstrate their compliance with GDPR, and that includes things like appointing a data protection officer, maintaining records of processing activities, and conducting data protection impact assessments. In addition, if the organization experiences a data breach, they must inform the Information Commissioner's Office within 72 hours, and any affected individuals must also be notified. So if an organization has a data breach and your data was a part of that, that organization must notify you as soon as possible. The Data Protection Act of 2018 complements the UK GDPR and provides additional provisions specific to the UK context. The first point being national security and law enforcement. There are provisions for processing personal data for national security and law enforcement purposes, which are not covered by the UK GDPR. Outlines of special categories of data and specific conditions for processing these categories of data, such as health data, racial or ethnic origins, and political opinions. And organizations must meet stricter requirements when handling this type of data. And there are also some exemptions here. So, processing personal data in specific contexts, such as for journalistic, academic, or research purposes, is allowed and has a little bit more leeway. The Privacy and Electronic Communications Regulations set some specific rules for electronic marketing, such as cookies and privacy in electronic communications. For direct marketing, organizations must obtain consent before sending marketing communications via email, SMS, or other electronic means. And with cookies, websites must inform users about the use of cookies and obtain consent before placing cookies on their devices, except for strictly necessary cookies for the website to operate. And there's the additional pieces of legislation that we mentioned as well, such as the Freedom of Information Act of 2000, which provides the public with the right to access information held by public authorities, which could include personal data in certain contexts, and the Computer Misuse Act of 1990, which addresses unauthorized access to computer systems and data, and provides legal protection against data breaches and cybercrime. All organisations operating in the United Kingdom must be aware of and comply with all of these laws when processing personal data. This includes implementing appropriate measures for data privacy, usage and storage, ensuring individuals' rights are respected, and maintaining transparency and accountability in data handling practices. And non-compliance with these laws and legislation can result in significant fines and reputational damage, making it essential for organisations to prioritise data protection and privacy. Now, as I mentioned before, these laws and legislations are subject to some changes over time, so they're all available to read through on legislation.gov.uk. You'll also learn some more about data laws and legislation in Root Core 8 legislation later on in the course. So if you're a Patreon member, you can head back to the task sheet and have a go at the third and final task on there. And this one's a little bit longer. It'll take you somewhere between 30 to 45 minutes. So pause the video here, have a go at task 3, and then come back and we'll finish the video off with a couple of exam questions. So, in this video, we've identified some methods to ensure data accuracy. We've explained the concepts of data validation and verification. And we've also analysed the requirements and legislation of data privacy in the UK. Let's have a go at some exam questions. Here's the first one. Explain the difference between data verification and data validation. There's 4 marks available. And for your second question, name 2 pieces of legislation relating to the security and privacy of data in the United Kingdom and some of their key points. And there are 6 marks available here. So that brings us to the end of the video. In the next video, we'll be looking at data maintenance. So make sure you're subscribed to youtube.com/@T-Level-Tactics, and also head over to the Patreon at patreon.com/T-Level-Tactics to take a look at the task sheets, all the exclusive content that our Patreon members get, and also access to our exclusive Spotify podcast editions if you sign up as a T-Level Tactician. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.